All right. Hey everyone, Tyler Bartosh here with Unscripted Expert Insights. In this episode, I sit down with Max Jackson, founder of Cannabis Wise Guys, a grower, consultant, and advocate who's helping shape how cannabis is grown and regulated throughout the country. We dive deep into what most operators get wrong when they're designing their facilities, how bad math and investor pressure can tank a grow before it even starts, and what the smart operators are doing to protect their harvest and their profits. If you're in the cannabis industry or thinking about it, this one's a must watch. So Max, for people who don't know you yet, or maybe like me, just know you from LinkedIn, what problems do you solve for cannabis operators and the industry as a whole that no one else seems to?
Thanks. So in short, I would say I'm a translator. The cannabis industry is split by this green fault line, is what I call it. On one side, you have the plant and people who understand it, and then on the other side, you have operators, regulators, and investors who don't necessarily understand the plant and things like that. I actually had somebody mention to me just yesterday, the best way I've ever heard it said. Someone was like, "Did you ask the plants?" When it comes to this like arbitrary timeline, this like short timeline, like, oh, we're gonna do it in 30 days. Like, did you ask the plants? I was like, wow, that was the greatest explanation of everything that I do, all summed up into one question. So I was really, really excited by that. Because most of the time I feel like the money people understand the capital and the people who work with the plants understand the plants. Then you'll have policy people who understand the policy from an abstract perspective, but don't know what the implications are of things. So now the problem I solve is translating operational reality into financial terms, into regulatory language, into things that help prevent making these big mistakes that are preventable, because we've seen in other states how these things can play out.
And you know, as we look at some of the work you've done around the country, does something stand out as like what's one of your biggest wins that you feel, comes to mind when you think about this?
Just being able to be involved in, like, coming from the West Coast, being an operator in Northern California in a time and in an area in Trinity County where some of the regulations just made no sense. We were cultivating. It's in the Emerald Triangle. It's one of the cultivation capitals of the world, and we had no dispensaries in our entire county, just because of arbitrary opt-out laws. And we'll see those same laws carry over into other states. But I think the coolest part is being able to take my experience from working in California, from being a photographer all up and down the West Coast, and from being a consumer since day one in Colorado's recreational market, and take those over into states like Virginia and New Jersey and the East Coast, which is where I'm from, and be like, hey, look, before we make the same mistake again, let's think about this first, and let's look to those who have come before us and not make those mistakes. So I think that's the coolest part, is actually being able to now take the entire path that I've walked and bring that into being able to make an impact at a larger scale.
Well, that I like hearing this, and you already shared you've got this multifaceted approach to facilities, whether it's the design or the legislation piece. When you're looking at like the facility design or operations, what's one thing that keeps showing up as a silent killer for profitability for grows?
So to me, the number one silent killer operationally is going to be not sizing your post-harvest space correctly, which is actually the thing that we connected on originally,
Yeah.
which is I walked into this facility a couple weeks ago, and the first thing I see on the wall, big blueprints, walk straight over to it. I looked at their dry rooms. It's the first thing I checked for. They had 5 dry rooms, and I'm like, okay, how many flower rooms do you have? 10. So they had 5 dry rooms to 10 flower rooms, and that is amazing, because so many times I will see bottlenecks in your harvest workflow. If you have 7 flower rooms and you have 3 dry rooms and you think you're going to be able to harvest every single day, if the plants are in the dry room for 14 days plus cleaning, and if you have to do other work in the dry room as well, so they're in there for maybe 21 days, that space is blocked off. And if you think you're going to harvest every 14 days, you're gonna have a problem. So you're either pulling plants out of the dry room too soon, or you're letting plants run too long, and somewhere your timeline is off. And that is gonna be a baked in mistake that a lot of the times you can't really do anything about.
Right. And so there really is no path out other than expanding the facility or rebuilding, remodeling it, right?
Yeah, it's definitely it's you can try and work some things, but yeah, you'd really would have to remodel and try and plan in a new dry room that can actually fit the workflows you're thinking. And it's so this is what pains me the most is I still see facilities built this way or people who just don't realize that they need a dry room at all. And it's just this is a completely unforced error because there's so much information out there about this that it blows my mind every time I still see it.
Well, and it's, the key is trying to get ahead of that and finding people, maybe before they've already committed all these funds or work towards it. So many people are bootstrapping their own grows as well. Is there a simple rule of thumb for matching, flower rooms to dry rooms so somebody doesn't sabotage their own harvest schedule?
Yeah. So the simplest rule of thumb would be that your dry room must be able to hold your largest possible harvest from the biggest flower room. If you plan for what your average harvests are going to be, or if and then you crush it, you're hitting your better yields than you have before, but now your dry room can't handle it. So now you see that you're crushing it in this realm, and you know that you don't have enough room for these plants. So the simplest rule of thumb would just be to figure out how many days your harvest cycle is going to be, how many days you're planning on drying the plants for, whether that's 14 plus cleaning. In California, we had to also do the bucking down and the post-harvest work in that same space. So our dry room was blocked off for 21 days. So if your harvest is any less than on that 22nd day, you're going to have a problem. So really just figuring out, like zooming out all the way, zoom out to your year and figure out, okay, how many harvests can I do in a year based on these dry rooms or based on the flower rooms that I want to have? How many dry rooms do I need to hit these actual targets? And that you're also going to know exactly what your calendar looks like for the entire year. You'll know that on Tuesday, October 40th is the day that we harvest.
So, and do you think, something pushing this is that facilities, maybe they were built more for investor decks rather than real world application or, what's happening?
Yeah, that's so the post that I don't know that if I mentioned it specifically in that post, but I refer to this as the calendar trap. And it is really the fantasy math that investors love. You're going to take 365 days and you're going to divide it by 62 days, the 62 days it takes to flower a plant. And you're going to say we can hit 5.5 harvests a year, and that's being conservative because really the number's like 5.8 or something like that. So they're like, look, we shaved that point 0.3 off. It was super casual. Uh, but if you have the 5 flower rooms in one dry room, your next flower room is going to be done while your dry room is still full, and that is definitely something that we're like, okay, cool, we can do this, we can hit all these margins, we can hit all these harvests, but if your facility is not built for that, the investors are gonna have a problem. So it's a twofold issue because one, it could be built that way and nobody knew, which definitely happens. I see business plans come my way where they're neglecting to factor in dry space, veg space, mom space, stuff that you like, basic stuff that you need to grow a plant. And it's because the people who are writing these pro formas don't know how to grow a plant or what is required to grow a plant. And the craziest example I saw a crazy business plan where they didn't have veg space. Investors from out of the country actually wrote on there in another language that we didn't know what it meant. And I'm looking at it and I was like, oh, this is them trying to say that you didn't factor in veg space into your business plan.
Geez, so is that, veg space for the moms and then dry rooms, are those some of the main things that you look for on a new build out to really understand, does the team get this or not?
Yeah, absolutely. if the dry room math is solid, and then your support spaces, so your veg, your clone, your moms, and even things like your nutrient delivery room, where all of your tanks and your salts and your nutrients or your soil or whatever are stored. I think as long showing me that all of these things are a forethought instead of an afterthought. Like, oh, we're gonna shove this stuff in that closet because we didn't have anywhere to put it. It's like, no, every single step of the way, these things matter, and every single little thing adds up, and pounds aren't $3,000 each anymore.
Yeah.
It's you can't have all of these operational bottlenecks built in because they just chip off your profit revenue, your profit. Yeah, they just chip off your profit margin
Mhm.
little by little. And if you have that happening at every step of the way, by the time you get there, and by the time pounds are lower than $1,000 each, you may have a facility that you built that is not viable.
Well, and yeah, you bring up a key point, and it's been interesting, as we've worked in a lot of new states and then watched the mature states where that price per pound, if Michigan and Croptober, we've seen growers down in that 400 or 500 range. Business plans were built on 2,500 to 3,000, and so there's not a lot of leeway for them. They've got to figure out a way to get leaner and really more efficient. So, is there do you see a low cost option that helps move the needle for any operators that might be stuck in one of those types of designs?
Yeah, absolutely. And exactly what you just said is the reality for most operators because you have these great numbers in your state because it's just became legal and your competition's not really there yet. But 3 years in is when we start to see more. If it takes almost 2 years to build a facility. So 3 years in, we start to see prices coming down, and then 4 or 5 years in, they start to come down even more. Michigan did that a lot faster. Uh,
Certainly.
but yeah. The biggest thing I would recommend, because a lot of people like chase these fixes, most people are flying blind. So if you can get some data into your facility and start understanding why things are happening instead of just your observations. Oh, this is happening over there, but we don't know why this is happening over there. You can get sensors in there for like environmental sensors. Maybe you just
Mhm.
have one that's not always calibrated. Maybe let's put in three in the room or four in the room. And we can map out and see, how is this air flowing? Is there a pocket over there that's causing you problems? I also am a huge advocate for substrate sensors because we can see, not only can we control the plants based on what we learn from what's going on in their root zones, we can also just make sure that they're just healthy from a baseline level, and that if something bad happens, like say an irrigation line is clogged or someone didn't water room 4 today, someone's going to get a ping on their phone and you're going to find out before something bad happens that you have an issue. And the data really is, other than the cost of sensors, and a lot of people already have these sensors in their facilities and they're just not utilizing them to their fullest capacity. The data is your best game. It's free if you've already got it. Even looking at back at your harvest records, most states require that we have every plant is weighed, every metric. We weigh every plant through metric. So
Mhm.
I developed a system where we laid out our metric tags instead of it being chaos, whatever. We just put them wherever they go. It was methodical. We would lay them out like in order on the benches, and then I could take that data and put it into a chart where we can see a heat map of the wet weights of our harvest. So we're taking this compliance burden that we all have to do, even though I would argue that it makes no sense. And I'm like, all right, how can we at least, if we're going to take this data, let's use this data. And now we're like, okay, cool. The first 6 plants in each bed are drying back too much because of the airflow. So let's put another half a dripper in there. And you have other problems. Same thing on the sidewalls. So let's add a little bit more irrigation over there. And you can start to figure out what's happening. And then comparing that data, like all of this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you're pulling down 4 or 5 harvests a year, you have it across 5 rooms, 6 rooms,
Mhm.
you have so much information to figure out what's going on, why is it going on. Let's run an experiment where we change one variable at a time instead of six, and try and understand what levers we can pull to work with what we have, because there are a lot of suboptimal facility designs, But
Mhm.
let me tell you, people have been doing this in garages and basements and tents and shipping containers buried in the woods for a lot longer than weed's been legal, and they figured
Right.
it out.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because I think, the pros in the industry get it and know it and, speak your language. I think for the average Joes and Jills out there that might have Cheech and Chong or something only as a reference for weed, they don't understand the science that goes behind the agricultural side and then the processes all the way through it, which I think has been really eye-opening with legalization across the country when people suddenly realize this isn't just stoners. There's a lot that goes into this. So in your experience, Max, what separates a good cultivation team from a great one?
That is a really good question. It's an important question to ask. And a good team, I'd say they're just growing weed. They could be growing really good weed too. They're plant people who follow SOPs and they're reacting to problems as they come up. They are getting a good quality product out the door, but they may be scrambling around a little bit. They may be playing more firefighter than being able to continue to innovate. So, in my opinion, that a great team really understands the whole business. They are the translators themselves. They are able to say that we need these things because of a return that's going to happen down the line, and also be able to look at data and say, hey, these humidity spikes over here keep happening, and we start getting powdery mildew right around then. So it's like, oh, we can adjust this and we can add more airflow before it becomes an outbreak. And being able to really be a systems thinker and understand from the full zoomed out level, even at say you're just a cultivation tech and I say just a cultivation tech, like the people that are growing the plants are probably the hardest working, least paid people in the entire industry, which is super backwards and unfortunate, but that's kind of
Yes.
just how it works in agriculture. It is just a plant, and these people are the backbone of the industry and not necessarily treated as such.
Mhm.
But being able to take yourself all the way out from your position and look at the whole facility. How does what you're doing work within the facility? How does this choice that somebody made over here to change irrigation or something like that, how does that affect the bigger picture? And also, I would say being able to push back on a schedule and say, hey, this doesn't look right. This is like that calendar trap. This is not going to work because I know how plants work and maybe investment or ownership doesn't. And it's definitely tricky. But it's really like being fully involved in the entire business, I'd say.
Well, and I think you said it there too, where we see so often just a disconnect between operations and maybe ownership of not understanding that process. So if operators understood just, one thing about protecting their harvest and their facility from preventable losses, I'm in the insurance business where there's some that are preventable and, others that are just flat out, accidents. That's why we're here. But what would that be? One thing that they could do to protect their harvester facility.
The number one thing, and I see it happen quite often, is that automation gets pitched and implemented as this way to save on labor because labor is going to be your hardest and most expensive part of your project. But automation without monitoring is a recipe for disaster. Automation is a tool to empower labor to be able to do their jobs better and to focus more on the plants. But when you automate something like irrigation, for example, and this is a direct example from the facility that I ran. Um, if you have automated irrigation, the plants are feeding themselves, but you don't have anything that's going to confirm that the plants actually fed themselves, then you're just going to assume that this thing that was supposed to happen did indeed happen. So if somebody is mixing nutrients and there's a big sign on the wall that says, "Do not leave this valve closed, you will kill the plants," and they happen to leave that valve closed without a sensor somewhere in the substrate there or in the pipes that's going to tell you that the water didn't flow through the pipes, then you're not going to catch that right away because you're going to think the system's just humming along, doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Mhm.
So I actually was battling with the investors at this facility to get some substrate sensors because I knew that this problem existed. We were running extremely lean. They just implemented automation as a way to cut labor. So I'm like, we need sensors. We need, not only do we need data, we just need fire alarms to tell us if the plants are about to die. So I got vetoed on all of my purchase requests. So I went and bought some, put them in this greenhouse, and literally a couple days later, I get a ping on my phone, and they the plant is dry back too far. I'm like, why is that? That's weird. Let's go check it out. Walk in, valve closed. Had that gone throughout the entire like 100-degree Trinity County summer day, that row of plants would have been cooked.
Wow.
And it's $100 sensor that's saving tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in product. And it's sold a lot. The sensors are sold a lot as data and being able to crop steer and control the plants, which I am fully on board with. But from a base level, these things are just basic product insurance. Like, you're gonna know before something bad happens. It's not only is it quality, is it product insurance? I keep saying quality because it's also quality insurance. You're able to understand what's happening with your plants, and it's again just more data. Which, as long as it's just not data for the sake of data, then it's always great.
Well, Max, you've spoken my language quite a bit here with how you help companies avoid risk and prevent future loss to either their money, time, or plants. And so the most important part here now is, where can operators follow you to learn more, and if they want to avoid these types of mistakes, how do they connect with you?
Yeah, definitely. I would say the best place to find my work is on LinkedIn. Just search for Max Jackson. And you could also find my website, cannabiswiseguys.com. And I would say, honestly, the best place to start on my website is an article that I wrote. It's also on LinkedIn, called The 8-Question Reality Check for Cannabis Ventures. And that goes through 8 questions that I ask and kind of goes through the red flags that we'll see when it comes down to things we've talked about in this conversation, like sizing of your facility space, projecting pound prices out, what's your staffing going to look like, what's your plans for automation, and things like that.
Awesome. Well, Max, it's been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate the time here. And for everybody watching, listening, whatever it might be, go check them out, Cannabis Wise Guys, and have a good one.
That was an awesome conversation with Max, packed with insight on what it really takes to build a sustainable cannabis operation. If you're an operator, investor, or someone who just loves seeing the industry done right, make sure you follow Max Jackson and Cannabis Wise Guys. He's one of the guys out there shaping the next chapter of cannabis. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes of Unscripted Expert Insights with real people, real conversations, real value. See ya.